Have you ever been the smartest person in a room full of people who did not know it? Have you ever watched someone with half your capability and twice your confidence walk into a situation and receive the treatment you deserved, the attention, the respect, the specific quality of deference that the room extends to people it has decided to take seriously, while you sat there knowing more, understanding more, and receiving less? Have you ever looked at someone in a position of authority and thought with the specific kind of frustration that only competent people feel? How did you get here? Have you ever been surrounded by people whose decisions make no sense, whose reasoning is built on assumptions that a single careful question would demolish, whose confidence is so far beyond what their capability warrants that watching them operate feels like watching someone drive a car they do not know how to steer? If you have felt any of that, and my friend, if you are watching this video, you have felt all of it, then what follows is going to change how you move through every environment where your intelligence is higher than the room's ability to recognize it. Here is what you have been getting wrong. You have been assuming that intelligence is enough. That being right is the same as being effective. That understanding the situation more deeply than the people around you is the same as being positioned to act on that understanding. Not. Intelligence without the specific behavioral architecture that makes intelligence productive is one of the most expensive gifts a person can carry, because it shows you the problem with perfect clarity. It shows you the solution with perfect precision. And then it watches you fail to implement either one because the environment you are operating in does not reward understanding. It rewards positioning. It rewards composure under pressure. It rewards the specific quality of disciplined confidence that makes a room trust someone before the quality of their thinking has even been evaluated. And you, with all your understanding and all your insight and all your genuine capability, have been losing to people who have less of all three because they have more of the thing that the room actually responds to. Machiavelli understood this with the painful clarity of a man who was smarter than most of the people he worked for and who spent 15 years watching men of inferior intelligence occupy positions that his own capability warranted. He was the most perceptive diplomat in Florence. He understood the political dynamics of Renaissance Italy with a depth that nobody in his environment could match, and he was exiled, replaced, tortured, dismissed by men who understood less, but who moved through the political world with the specific quality of strategic confidence that Machiavelli, for all his intelligence, had not fully developed until it was too late. That experience, the experience of being genuinely right and genuinely powerless at the same time, is what produced The Prince. Not a book about being smart. A book about what the smart person needs to build around their intelligence in order to make the intelligence produce the outcomes it deserves. This video gives you 7 laws, not 7 ideas, 7 laws. 7 specific, buildable, immediately practicable changes in how you carry your intelligence through the environments where it is currently being wasted. By the end of this video, you will not be smarter than you are right now. You will be more effective, and the gap between smart and effective is the gap that has been costing you everything. If you are ready to stop being the smartest person who keeps losing to the most confident one, comment the words "I build around my intelligence." Like this video because every like pushes it towards someone who is still assuming that being right is enough. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop your location and the time right now. This community is real, and right now it matters who is here. Law 1. Intelligence without discipline is a loaded weapon with no trigger discipline. Build the discipline before you build the display. Let me tell you something about intelligence that nobody in your life has been direct enough to say. Your intelligence, unmanaged, is your biggest liability. Not because it is wrong, because it is fast. It sees the answer before the room has finished forming the question. It identifies the problem before the meeting has finished presenting it. It evaluates the speaker before the speaker has finished making their point. And that speed, that extraordinary, genuine, entirely valid cognitive advantage, produces a set of behaviors that the room does not interpret as intelligence. The room interprets them as impatience, as arrogance, as the specific quality of someone who has decided they are smarter than everyone else, and who cannot hide that decision well enough to make the room comfortable working with them. Most intelligent people let their speed show. They interrupt because the point was obvious before the sentence was finished. They show frustration with slow processes because the solution is clear and the process is preventing its implementation. They display the visible impatience that accompanies watching people take 45 minutes to arrive at something they could see in the first 3. Machiavelli would never let his speed show. Here is what he would do instead. He would discipline the display. He would hold the answer while the room finished arriving at the question. He would sit with the slow process without visible frustration, using the time that felt wasted to observe the room's dynamics, to map the alliances, to identify which of the slow people held influence and which were noise. He would convert the waiting, which feels excruciating to the intelligent mind, into gathering. Because the intelligent person, who is also disciplined, is not just smarter than the room. They are better positioned than the room. And positioned plus smart is the combination that actually produces outcomes. Smart alone just produces frustration. Here is your practice. In your next meeting where you know the answer before the discussion has properly begun, hold it. Do not suppress it permanently. Hold it. Let the room move through its process. Watch who says what. Notice which contributions land and which ones generate resistance. Track which ideas the key decision maker responds to and which ones they set aside. All of this information, gathered during the time that your intelligence is being disciplined into patience, is information that makes your eventual contribution more precisely aimed than it would have been if you had fired the answer the moment it arrived. The disciplined deployment of intelligence is always more effective than the undisciplined display of it. Machiavelli would tell you that the difference between the advisor who was listened to and the advisor who was dismissed was almost never the quality of the advice. It was the timing and the positioning of the delivery. And timing and positioning are the products of discipline, not of intelligence. Let me give you a specific example that will make this land in your bones. You are in a team meeting. A colleague presents a plan that has 3 obvious flaws. You see them instantly. Your mind has already mapped the failure points, the missing assumptions, and the specific moment in execution where the plan will break. The undisciplined intelligent person raises their hand and identifies all 3 flaws immediately. The room hears the analysis. The analysis is correct. And the colleague whose plan just got publicly dismantled has now become an adversary. See Law 4. While the room has filed you as the person who is brilliant but difficult to work with. The disciplined, intelligent person sees the same 3 flaws and holds them. They let the discussion proceed. They listen to what the room values about the plan. They identify which of the 3 flaws the room might discover on its own and which one only they can see. And then they offer 1 observation, not 3, delivered as a contribution rather than a correction. Something like, I think there is 1 area worth stress testing before we proceed, and here is what I am seeing. 1 flaw. Delivered at the right moment. Framed as collaboration rather than correction. That single observation lands with 10 times the impact of the 3-flaw dismantling because it was disciplined into precision rather than released at full volume. Machiavelli would tell you that the advisor who delivers 1 well-timed observation holds more influence than the advisor who delivers 10 urgent corrections. because the room does not value volume. The room values precision, and precision is not a function of intelligence. It is a function of the discipline applied to the intelligence. If this landed, comment, "I discipline my intelligence." Law 2. Discipline without patience is rigidity, and rigidity in a changing environment is the fastest path to irrelevance. My friend, before I get into this one, let me separate discipline from something it gets confused with constantly. Discipline is not stubbornness. Discipline is the practice of holding your position when the pressure to abandon it is produced by impulse. Stubbornness is the practice of holding your position when the pressure to adjust it is produced by reality. The difference is in what is generating the pressure. If the pressure is emotional, if the urge to move comes from frustration or anxiety, or the desire for immediate gratification, discipline holds. If the pressure is informational, if new data has arrived that genuinely changes the picture, discipline adjusts. Stubbornness holds in both cases. And holding when reality is telling you to adjust is not strength. It is the most expensive form of weakness available to anyone who believes they are being principled when they are actually being rigid. Machiavelli wrote about this with the directness of someone who had watched rigidity destroy more capable men than any external adversary ever did. He observed that the rulers who held their course, regardless of changing circumstances, were the rulers who were most consistently outmaneuvered by opponents who were less capable but more adaptive. He wrote that the successful ruler must know how to change with the times, that the quality he called virtue was not the stubborn adherence to a single approach, but the adaptable intelligence to read the changing conditions and adjust the approach accordingly without losing the underlying principle. Here is the contrast. Most intelligent people mistake their certainty for correctness. They arrive at a position through genuine analysis and then defend that position beyond the point where the analysis still supports it, because abandoning the position feels like abandoning the intelligence that produced it. Machiavelli would never confuse the intelligence with the conclusion. He would hold the intelligence sacred and the conclusion provisional, because the intelligence can produce a new conclusion when the data changes. But the conclusion, held rigidly beyond its data, stops being the product of intelligence and starts being the product of ego. And ego, as Machiavelli documented across every political case he studied, is the most reliable producer of bad outcomes in any environment where the conditions are changing faster than the ego's willingness to update. Here is your practice. Once a week, take your strongest current conviction about a professional or personal situation and ask yourself, what would have to be true for this conviction to be wrong? Not whether it is wrong. What would have to be true for it to be wrong? If you can answer that question, if you can clearly articulate the specific conditions under which your current position would need to be revised, you are disciplined. If you cannot answer it, if the question itself feels threatening to the conviction, you are rigid. And the rigid person, however intelligent their original analysis was, is now operating from a position that the world has potentially moved past while they were busy defending it. Let me give you a specific scenario. You have taken a position on a professional issue. You analyzed it carefully, you reached a conclusion, and you stated that conclusion publicly. 3 weeks later, new information arrives that materially changes the picture. The conclusion you reached was correct at the time. The analysis was sound, given the data available. But the new data means the conclusion needs updating. The rigid person does not update. Updating feels like admitting they were wrong. And admitting they were wrong in public, after having stated the conclusion publicly, feels like a loss of credibility that they cannot afford. So they hold. They defend the original conclusion against the new data. They find reasons why the new information does not change the picture. And the room watches a capable person spend their energy defending a position that reality has moved past. Machiavelli would update. Without drama, without the performance of having changed his mind that draws attention to the change, he would simply adjust. He would incorporate the new information into a revised position and present the revision with the same composure that accompanied the original. Because Machiavelli understood something about credibility that rigid people miss. The credibility cost of updating a position based on new information is almost zero. The credibility cost of defending an outdated position against visible evidence is enormous. The room respects the person who adjusts when the data changes. The room loses respect for the person who holds when the data says to move. Adaptability is not weakness. Adaptability is the mark of a mind that values accuracy over ego. And accuracy, held consistently across time, is the most durable form of credibility available. Comment I stay adaptive if you understand the difference between discipline and rigidity, and you know which one you have been practicing. Law 3. Confidence without composure is arrogance. And the room reads the difference in the first 30 seconds. Let me tell you something that is going to save you from one of the most common mistakes that intelligent, capable people make. You have probably been told at some point in your life that you need more confidence. That the reason your intelligence is not producing the outcomes it deserves is that you are not projecting enough of it. That you need to speak up more, advocate for yourself more, make your capability visible in ways that the room cannot ignore. And whoever told you that was partly right and fundamentally wrong. Because the thing they were calling confidence, the louder voice, the more assertive posture, the more visible display of capability, is not what the room responds to as authority. The room responds to composure. And composure and confidence are not the same thing. Confidence says, I know I am right. Composure says, I know I am right and I do not need you to confirm it before I remain settled in that knowledge. Confidence projects outward. Composure radiates from within. Confidence can be faked with volume and assertion. Composure cannot be faked because it lives in the body, in the pace of the speech, in the stillness of the hands, in the quality of the eye contact, in the specific way a composed person receives a challenge without the visible acceleration that an uncomposed person cannot hide. The room reads all of this before the first substantive word has been processed, and the reading determines whether the room treats you as an authority or as someone who is trying to seem like one. Machiavelli would never substitute confidence for composure. Here is the distinction he would draw. He observed that the men who were most consistently treated as authorities in any room they entered were not the most assertive. They were the most settled. Their energy did not push outward toward the room. It sat, contained and steady, and the room came to it. The pushing was unnecessary because the settling was sufficient, and the settling, the specific quality of someone who occupies their intelligence with the same natural ease that they occupy their body, is the thing that composure produces and that confidence alone cannot replicate. Here is your practice. Before your next significant interaction, stop thinking about what you are going to say and start thinking about how you are going to be. Not the content, the quality. The settled, unhurried, genuinely present quality of someone who has enough inside them that the interaction does not need to provide anything in order for them to remain whole. That quality is composure. And composure carried into a room where most of the other people are operating from anxiety or the performance of confidence stands out with a clarity that no display of intelligence could match. Because the room was never evaluating your intelligence, it was evaluating your energy. And composed energy is the energy that generates trust, deference, and the specific willingness to follow that every intelligent person needs the room to extend if their intelligence is going to produce the outcomes it deserves. Let me give you a specific scenario that separates composure from confidence in a way you will feel. Two people walk into a job interview. Both are qualified. Both are intelligent. Both want the role. The first person projects confidence. They speak with energy. They make their case with visible conviction. They advocate for themselves with the specific quality of assertiveness that interview advice tells people to display. The second person carries composure. They speak at a measured pace. They answer questions with the unhurried quality of someone who has thought about the answer before delivering it. They do not advocate for themselves. They let the quality of their responses do the advocating. The interviewer evaluates both. And the evaluation, which feels like it is about the content of the answers, is actually about the energy of the delivery. The first person's energy said, "I need this role, and I am going to show you why I deserve it." The second person's energy said, "I am here because I chose to be, and the conversation will reveal whether this is the right fit for both of us." The first energy is confidence. The second is composure. And the interviewer, whose nervous system is processing the energy before it processes the content, treats the composed person with a quality of respect that the confident person has to work harder to earn. Because composure signals something deeper than confidence. It signals that this person's sense of their own value does not depend on this room's decision. And that independence, felt by the interviewer before any word has been consciously evaluated, is the thing that makes the room lean in. Comment, "I carry composure, not performance," if this just shifted how you think about what the room is actually evaluating when you walk through the door. Law 4. Never correct a fool publicly. The fool becomes your enemy, and the room becomes the fool's ally. My friend, this is the law that every intelligent person violates at least once before they understand why it costs so much. You are in a meeting. Someone says something that is factually wrong, not ambiguously wrong, objectively, demonstrably, clearly wrong. And your intelligence, which has been sitting patiently through the discussion, holding itself in the discipline that Law 1 taught you, fires. The correction arrives in your mind fully formed, precisely articulated, and undeniably accurate, and the impulse to deliver it is almost irresistible. Because the wrongness is so obvious. Because the room is about to proceed on the basis of incorrect information. Because the correction would serve everyone in the room by replacing the false premise with the true one. And here is what happens when you deliver it. The correction is received, the room processes it, and the dynamic that follows has nothing to do with the quality of the correction and everything to do with the social physics of what just occurred. Someone was made to look wrong in front of other people. That someone now has a motivated interest in finding fault with you, with your correction, with your positioning, with anything that can be used to restore the standing that the public correction cost them. The room, which witnessed the correction, has registered two things simultaneously. First, that you were right. Second, that you are the kind of person who demonstrates their rightness at someone else's expense. And the second registration, the social one, outlasts the first one, the factual one, by months or years. Most intelligent people correct publicly because the wrongness feels urgent. Machiavelli would never do that. Here is what he would do instead. He would note the error. He would approach the person privately after the meeting, and he would deliver the correction in a way that preserved the other person's dignity while achieving the same factual outcome. Something like, "I was thinking about what you mentioned in the meeting, and I noticed something that might be worth considering. And here is where the accurate information is shared, warmly, one-on-one, without the audience that turns a correction into a humiliation. The factual outcome is the same. The error gets corrected. But the social outcome is completely different. Instead of creating an enemy, you have created an ally. Someone who was treated with respect when they were wrong. Someone who received the accurate information without the public cost. Someone who now associates you with the specific quality of someone who helps rather than exposes. Machiavelli would tell you that the private correction is worth 10 public ones. Because the private correction builds a relationship, the public correction builds an adversary. And adversaries, in any environment where your position depends on more than just being right, are far more expensive than the satisfaction of the public correction is worth. Let me tell you why this law is the one that will change your relationships most immediately. Every person you have ever corrected publicly remembers the correction, not the content, the feeling. The specific, embodied, physically stored feeling of having been made to look wrong in front of people whose opinion matters to them. That memory does not fade with time. It stores itself in the body and resurfaces every time they see your face, hear your name, or encounter you in any context where the dynamic between you is being evaluated. You may have forgotten the correction. You may have moved on completely, but they have not. And their not having moved on shapes every subsequent interaction you have with them in ways that you cannot fully see because the motivation is internal to them and invisible to you. Machiavelli would say this about public correction. The man who was corrected in public does not remember the content of the correction. He remembers the man who delivered it, and the remembering governs the relationship from that moment forward in a direction that no amount of subsequent kindness can fully reverse. The private correction avoids this entirely. The person who is corrected in private has their dignity intact. Their public image is unscathed. The information they received was useful, and the delivery was respectful. And the relationship between the corrector and the corrected, rather than being damaged by the exchange, has been deepened by it. Because the private correction says something that the public one never could. I respect you enough to tell you this without an audience. That respect, experienced directly and without the social costs that the public correction would have imposed, produces something more valuable than being right ever could. It produces an ally. And allies, as Machiavelli documented across every political case he studied, are worth more than any number of people you were publicly correct about. Comment "I correct" in private if you have ever made the mistake of being publicly right in a way that created a privately motivated enemy. Before I move to Law 5, let me connect what you have heard so far. Laws 1 through 4 are about you, your discipline, your adaptability, your composure, your social intelligence about when and how to deploy what you know. The next 3 laws shift outward. They are about how to navigate the specific environments where your intelligence coexists with people who do not share it. And navigating those environments without losing your energy, your patience, or your positioning is the skill that separates the intelligent person who keeps losing to the room from the intelligent person who has learned to work with the room rather than against it. Subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Stay. Law 5. Use the fool's confidence against them. The overconfident person reveals their blind spots freely because they do not believe they have any. Let me tell you something about overconfident people that will change how you interact with every one of them from this point forward. The overconfident person does not guard their vulnerabilities, not because they are brave, because they do not believe the vulnerabilities exist. The specific quality of overconfidence that makes it so frustrating to watch from the outside is the same quality that makes it so useful to the person who understands how to work with it rather than against it. The overconfident person talks freely. They share their reasoning without caution. They reveal their plans without strategic management. They display their thinking in full because they believe their thinking is beyond challenge. And every display, every share, every moment of unguarded verbal output is a piece of information that the patient, disciplined, composed, intelligent person can receive, file, and use. Most intelligent people argue with overconfident fools. They meet the wrong reasoning with the right reasoning and expect the quality of the argument to determine the outcome. Machiavelli would never argue with an overconfident fool. Here is what he would do instead. He would listen. He would ask questions, not challenging questions that trigger the ego's defense system, but curious questions that invite more display. Tell me more about that approach. What made you decide on that direction? How do you see this playing out over the next few months? Each question feeds the overconfidence. Each question produces more information. And the information, gathered without resistance, gives the intelligent person a complete picture of the overconfident person's thinking, including the blind spots that the overconfident person cannot see because the overconfidence is specifically designed to prevent them from looking at them. Here is what you do with the information once you have it. You do not use it to publicly expose the blind spots. That would be a violation of Law 4 and would produce the same social cost. You use it to position yourself in the space that the blind spots create. The overconfident person cannot see the gap in their own reasoning. You can. And the person who occupies the gap, who builds in the space that the overconfident person does not know is empty, is the person who ends up holding the ground when the overconfident person's approach fails, not because they competed, because they positioned. And positioning, as Machiavelli documented across every political case he studied, is always more effective than competition. Let me tell you something about this law that goes deeper than the strategic level. The overconfident person in your environment is not your enemy. They are your information source. And the moment you stop seeing them as an obstacle and start seeing them as a source, your entire relationship to their behavior changes. The frustration drops, the irritation fades, because you are no longer consuming their output as something you have to correct or endure. You are receiving it as data, and data, received calmly and filed accurately, is always useful regardless of the quality of the source that produced it. Here is a specific example. The overconfident person in your workplace announces a plan. The plan has a significant blind spot that you can see immediately. Your old approach would have been to point out the blind spot, publicly or privately, depending on how much Law 4 has landed, and to offer the correction that your intelligence makes available. Your new approach, informed by this law, is different. You note the blind spot, you file it, you do not announce it, and you begin building in the space that the blind spot creates. Because the blind spot means the overconfident person is not competing for that space. They do not know it exists. And you, who can see what they cannot, have the entire space to yourself. When the plan eventually encounters the blind spot, when the failure that you predicted arrives, you are already positioned with the alternative. Not because you predicted the failure and announced it, because you predicted the failure and built around it. The prediction without the announcement is positioning. The prediction with the announcement is the correction that Law 4 told you to avoid. Same intelligence, different deployment, completely different outcome. Machiavelli would tell you that the fool's confidence is not your problem. It is your opportunity. Every blind spot is an open space. Every space you can see that they cannot is territory you can occupy without competition. Let the overconfidence continue. It is building you a room of your own. Comment. I let the overconfidence reveal what it cannot see if you just saw a different way to handle the next overconfident person in your environment. Law 6. Protect your energy from people who drain it without producing value. Not every conversation is worth having, and not every fool is worth engaging. My friend, I need you to hear this one carefully because it addresses the thing that is costing you the most on a daily basis and that nobody has told you clearly enough to stop doing. You are spending energy on people who do not deserve the expenditure. Not because they are bad people, because the exchange rate is wrong. Every minute you spend arguing with someone who is not going to change their mind is a minute you are not spending on the work that actually builds your position. Every hour you spend frustrated by someone's incompetence is an hour you are not spending on the competence that would make the incompetence irrelevant. Every unit of emotional energy you discharge into the dynamic of dealing with someone whose understanding of the situation is so far from yours that the conversation cannot possibly produce alignment is a unit of emotional energy that is now gone and cannot be recovered for the interaction where it would actually matter. Most intelligent people engage with every challenge. They feel the pull to correct every error, to address every misunderstanding, to bring every person in their environment up to the level of understanding that they themselves carry. Machiavelli would never do that. He would look at the challenge and ask one question before engaging. Does this engagement produce an outcome that justifies the resources it will consume? If the answer is yes, if the person can be educated, if the misunderstanding can be corrected, if the engagement will produce a genuine improvement in the situation, engage fully. If the answer is no, if the person is committed to their position regardless of evidence, if the misunderstanding is a feature of their worldview rather than a gap in their information, if the engagement will consume resources without producing change, disengage, not coldly, not dismissively. With the warm, brief, composed acknowledgement that the difference exists and the decision to redirect the energy rather than spending it on the resolution that the situation cannot produce. Machiavelli would tell you this: your energy is the most finite resource you carry, more finite than your time, because time lost can sometimes be recovered through efficiency. Energy lost is gone. And the intelligent person who spends their energy arguing with fools is the intelligent person who arrives at the moments that actually matter with depleted reserves and diminished capacity. The fool, who was never going to change, regardless of how much energy you spent, walks away from the exchange as energetic as they entered it. You walk away drained. The exchange was a net transfer from the person who had something to spend to the person who had nothing to lose. That is not an exchange. That is a tax. And the intelligent person stops paying taxes to conversations that produce no return. Let me give you a specific framework for deciding which engagements deserve your energy and which do not. Before any significant exchange with someone whose intelligence you question, ask yourself 3 questions. First, can this person's mind be changed by evidence? If the answer is no, if their position is held not by reasoning that can be updated but by identity that cannot be challenged, disengage. You will spend everything and change nothing. Second, does this person's opinion affect my actual outcomes? If the answer is no, if their wrongness does not impact your position, your work, or your trajectory, let it stand. Being right about everything is not a strategic objective. Being effective about the things that matter is. Third, will the energy I spend here be available for the interaction where it is actually needed later today? If the answer is no, if the exchange will deplete you before the important moment arrives, save it. Because the important moment will come. It always comes. And the person who arrives at it with full reserves is the person who performs at the level their intelligence deserves. Machiavelli would tell you that the most common form of self-sabotage among intelligent people is the indiscriminate spending of cognitive and emotional resources on engagements that cannot produce a return. The fool who argued with every senator in the Roman Forum was not doing politics. He was doing exhaustion. And exhaustion, as Machiavelli documented across every case he studied, is the state that produces the worst decisions, not stupidity. Exhaustion. Because the exhausted, intelligent person makes worse decisions than the rested fool. That is the cost of spending where the return cannot be generated. Guard against it the way you would guard against any other form of waste. Because that is what it is. Comment, I protect my energy if you have been spending it on exchanges that never produce the outcome the spending was aimed at. Law 7. The most intelligent response to stupidity is not brilliance, it is silence. Because silence preserves your resources while the fool depletes theirs. This is the last law, and it is the one that everything else in this video has been building toward. So I need you here. I need you focused. Because this law is the one that, more than any other, separates the intelligent person who consistently produces outcomes from the intelligent person who consistently produces frustration. Here is the mechanism. When you respond to stupidity with brilliance, when you deploy your intelligence against the fool's ignorance, when you construct the argument that dismantles the wrong position with the precision and elegance that your cognitive capability makes possible, you have done something that feels like winning and functions like losing. You have spent. You have used your resources. You have deployed cognitive and emotional energy in an exchange whose outcome was never in doubt. Not because you were going to win, but because the fool was never going to concede. The brilliance was wasted, not because it was wrong, because it was aimed at a target that could not receive it. The fool does not have the architecture to process what you delivered. The argument, however perfect, lands on a surface that cannot absorb it, and the energy it cost you to construct it is now gone. Machiavelli would respond to stupidity with silence, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. The silence of someone who has everything to say and has chosen not to say it, because saying it would cost resources that the situation does not deserve. That silence communicates something that brilliance cannot communicate. It communicates that you have evaluated the exchange, assessed the probable outcome, and concluded that the probable outcome does not justify the expenditure of your response. And that evaluation, that visible, composed, quietly devastating assessment that the fool's contribution was not worth engaging with, lands harder than any argument. Because arguments can be dismissed, silence cannot. The fool who receives silence does not know what to do with it. The fool's entire operating system is built on generating a response. The response is the supply. The argument is the fuel. The engagement is what tells the fool's nervous system that their contribution mattered enough to produce a reaction. Silence denies all of it. And the denial, sustained across enough interactions, produces something that no argument could ever produce. The fool stops directing their output in your direction, not because you won the argument, because you refused to have one. And the refusal, maintained with the composure that this entire video has been building, is the most complete form of victory available in any interaction between intelligence and the absence of it. Machiavelli would tell you one final thing about this law. He would say, the greatest waste of intelligence he ever witnessed in the courts of Florence was not the intelligence that was wrong. It was the intelligence that was right, and that was spent on audiences that could not receive it. The brilliant advisor who argued with the incompetent ruler. The perceptive diplomat who explained the situation to the dense ally. The capable man who poured his understanding into conversations that consumed it without absorbing it. Each of them was right. Each of them was wasting the most valuable thing they had on the least productive use available. Machiavelli would say, save the intelligence, Deploy it where it will produce a return. Let it rest where it will not. And let the silence do the work that the intelligence was being wasted on. Let me tell you something personal about this law. The silence is the hardest practice in this entire video. Not because it is complicated, because it requires you to do the one thing that intelligent people find most difficult, to sit with the visible wrongness of someone else's position and choose not to correct it. To watch the fool proceed confidently on the basis of reasoning that you could dismantle in 3 sentences, and to decide that the 3 sentences are not worth the energy they would cost. That decision feels like surrendering. It feels like letting the wrong thing win, and in a narrow, immediate sense, it is. The wrong thing does proceed. The fool does continue uncorrected. But here is what Machiavelli would tell you about the longer view. The fool who proceeds uncorrected encounters reality. And reality, unlike your argument, does not require the fool's agreement to produce its effect. The wrong approach fails. The bad reasoning produces the bad outcome. And the failure, experienced directly by the fool and observed by the room, does the correcting that your argument was going to attempt, but does it in a form that is actually absorbed, because experience corrects where argument cannot. And the person who saved their energy, while the fool learned from experience, now has both the full reserves that were not spent on the argument, and the demonstrated evidence that their assessment was correct all along. The silence was not surrender. It was positioning. And the positioning, held with the patience that only genuine discipline can sustain, produces the outcome that the argument would have consumed all its resources trying to reach. My friend, let me leave you with this. The intelligent person who argues with every fool is an intelligent person whose intelligence is being converted into noise. The intelligent person who sits in silence, lets the fool proceed, and watches reality do the teaching is an intelligent person whose intelligence has been converted into power. That is the final law. That is the deepest distinction. And that distinction, lived as a daily practice, is the thing that will change your position in every room you walk into for the rest of your life. Comment: I let silence be my answer if you are ready to stop spending your brilliance on rooms that cannot receive it. My friend, let me close this out by saying something that I need you to carry with you beyond this video. Being intelligent is not your problem. Being intelligent is your advantage. The problem has never been the intelligence. The problem has been the absence of the architecture that makes the intelligence work. The discipline that holds the answer until the timing is right. The adaptability that adjusts the conclusion when the data changes. The composure that makes the room trust you before it evaluates your thinking. The social intelligence that corrects in private rather than in public. The strategic patience that uses the fool's overconfidence rather than arguing against it. The energy management that stops pouring resources into exchanges that produce no return. And the silence that preserves everything the arguing was consuming. You have all 7 of these now. They are not natural to you yet. They will be. Because every law in this video is a practice, and practice, repeated consistently across every significant interaction you have from this point forward, builds the architecture that was missing. Not overnight, but with the specific kind of compounding that Machiavelli observed in every person who finally learned to build around their intelligence rather than relying on the intelligence alone. Those people, the ones who had both the intelligence and the architecture, were the ones who ended up holding the positions that the merely intelligent kept losing to the merely confident. That is who you are building now. And that person, intelligent, disciplined, composed, strategically patient, and impossible to drain, is the person who will never again lose to someone who simply had louder confidence and less to be confident about. Like this video, If any of these 7 laws gave you a specific tool for making your intelligence produce the outcomes it has been failing to produce, share it with someone you know who keeps being the smartest person, who keeps losing to the most confident one. They need this. And subscribe to this channel, because the next video goes directly into the specific daily moments where these 7 laws get tested and how to hold them under genuine pressure when the old patterns of impatient display try to reassert themselves.